Let's begin with the definitions. We are talking about, I will talk from the geopolitical point of view. We are talking about technology and how it shapes the politics, even internally or globally. I think technology provides a new shape for both of politics, and its core is power, and new shape for international partnerships and alliances. How this has been done? Let's say that technology now is leading the process of building power. Technology is not only a tool to build power. Technology is also building now the system in which we are living. Technology is building the system. Soft power is about how to attract others to accept your norms. Hard power, how to force others to accept your willings. But technology now, with this, we can call structural technology power, it's about how the technology is building the system within which we are living. We will accept the norms, the values, the willings of the other, who is providing the technology, not because we are forced, not because we are attracted, but because we are living in the systems. They control the flow of data. They control how you manage your business, how to behave in your daily life. So technology is becoming a huge component of dominance in the current world. This is different from the hard power and soft power that we have seen from the beginning of the humanity in the earth. This become more deeper in its effect because of the AI. Now, the first time in the history, the machine will think maybe instead of the human. If we are going to the most extreme dreams, the self-learning machines, then machines will take decision and it will be an alternative for the human being himself. It's the first time in the history we face this challenge. So, who dominate all this process may dominate the ecosystem, the system, and the structure of our life. The problem is that the access for technology is not such open for everybody. We are talking like a world of monopoly in technology right now because of three main factors. The first one is that we face this kind of rivalry between US and China, mainly. And both of them see in the technology their privilege that they have to keep. We can see something of protectionism in the technology sphere. Then we have the high cost in the R&D activities. No country has the ability to spend all what is needed to develop its own technologies. Third thing is the speed of innovation in this area, that nobody can really go in this race unless he has a very sophisticated institution system that can lead him to do this. And we have seen now that the main two powers that are spending and innovating, take the lead in this area is US, then China, and everybody else is declining. And we have seen two new powers coming on the scene: Saudi Arabia and UAE. And we have seen Trump visit to the region here. It was mainly considering how to cooperate with the two countries about the new technologies. So that I think that technology now is shaping politics. It's giving new definition for the power, what we can call structural power. And then it's forming a new polar world. What does the polar world mean? That a group of countries are completely depending on a great power. Since the end of the Cold War, these trend has been, it was in decline. I can say that we are living in a non-polar system in the area of economics and politics. But now is the technology sphere. It's mostly, especially in the edge technologies, chips, AI. Either you are in this camp or in this camp. You are not allowed to be in both camps at the same time. So we can see now the formation of a new polar system in the sphere of technology, and this is very dangerous, and we have to notice where the great struggle between the two great powers will lead us in these fields.
Thank you, Mr. Malek. Dr. Jens, as a scholar of geoeconomics, I'm pretty sure you've been keeping up with the rise of strategic technology partnerships over the past few years. My first question to you would be, what measurable economic gains can we expect from these partnerships? And the second question is a bit more abstract, building off what Mr. Malek said. Do you agree with the idea of polarity in technology and with the new term that we've been hearing, and that is geotechnology, going with geopolitics and geoeconomics?
Thank you very much for the question, and again for being here. It's a pleasure to be back at the ECSSR and Abu Dhabi, and the topic of this panel is very much, I think, the critical discussion that we need to have. So I will begin with saying that I very much concur with what Dr. Malek just outlined in terms of how technology is changing and re-gearing the definition of power and the relation between countries. And from that standpoint, I'd like to take it further into the question that you just posed to me about the measurable economic gains. Because embedded in that question is, I think, a legacy understanding of a separation in silos between the political, the economic, and also ultimately media and narrative building as being operating in separate spheres, which was very much an expression of reality when we had hegemonic rule or hegemonic order, which we had until, well, quite recently, a couple of decades, exactly when that moment was, when we entered into a world of searching for polarity, another type of polarity, but we do not anymore have that infrastructure of hegemonic stability that enabled us to operate political matters, matters of media and public communication, and matters of economics as separate. And that also means that when we are looking at strategic partnership and see what are the benefits, separating the question of tangible economic benefits from political benefits and societal benefits, because I think these are the three pillars, is not fundamentally the right question to ask, even though I do believe that there are measurable benefits. And those benefits are quite clear. They are of two kinds. They are efficiency gains, because that's the core of the pillar of economic power. It comes from human ingenuity, generating productivity gains, prosperity gains, providing welfare. And the standard measure of progress within that pillar of power is efficiency, and therefore gains from efficiency translates and can be measured in different ways in terms of at the national level, ultimately in profitability keys and so forth. But there is another measurable economic benefit which comes from rents, economic rents. Because once these technologies settled into infrastructure, the infrastructure is a source of rent income for the infrastructure owner and controller of that infrastructure. And that's why it's very important to be the controller of that infrastructure, because either you are the rent receiver or you're the rent payer. And that rent it's not theft, it's not gift. What is it? Well, because the pillars are integrated, you can see the rents that can be gained from operating an infrastructure as payment for those two other pillars, for protection, because it's a matter of security as well, and security cannot be for free. So the economic rent is in fact not a super profit, it is payment for protection. And it's also payment for creating a stable narrative infrastructure and a stable narrative field, and avoid a chaotic media landscape, a chaotic public conversation. So when we often talk about dual-use technologies. This was your actual previous question, which technologies are the I would think we should talk about triple-use technologies. The most sought-after technologies are the technologies that have an impact on the power, both for three different perspectives. For military use, of course, and public order use. And those are the technologies that are important for processing data and processing, it's about intelligence as well, and developing weaponry and these kind of sort of things. But the second use are use for productivity. And the third is use which has to do with how we can narrate a media landscape that is profoundly different from the print and broadcast media age. So the triple use technologies are ultimately, again, I think of two kinds. There's one foundational technology, and that is, of course, artificial intelligence. Just as the foundational technology of the first machine age was artificial energy, steam, and then later on nuclear power. We have moved from artificial energy sources to now artificial intelligence. That's the foundational technology. And then there are derivative technologies. And I think we're going to hear from one example, but there are many different examples of robotics, for example, that can only depend on the pre-existence of a foundational technology. This was, I think that, an attempt to answer your question. You also asked me about polarity and technology and the role of geotechnology. So I think that geotechnology is absolutely a fact. It's sort of geotechnology captures the fact that in order to attain autonomy in the area of technology, you need to exert power over those infrastructures. And we have a number of contestants today, but there are not that many. And we already heard the United States and China, of course, are the leading geotechnology powers. But the landscape has not settled completely. And that opens up this opportunity, and which is really at the heart of the conversation of this roundtable, which is strategic partnerships as an avenue for this country, but also maybe for other countries, to create a competing and also balancing geotechnology block that it doesn't involve, that goes beyond the nation's borders, obviously. So it's another model. It's a model that we are exploring, and I think a very promising one. But it requires a lot more of novel thinking compared to the geotechnology powers of nation states, because it's something that is relatively untested. And so, so I think that coming back to the polarity questions, in my opinion, we are in a period of apolarity, in my opinion, because we're not in a unipolar moment anymore, but we haven't completely coalesced into bipolar model either. There is space for multipolarity, but we don't have multipolarity quite yet.
Thank you, Dr. Jens. That was very enlightening. Moving on from the scholars to the practitioners. My question to you, Mr. Omran Malek, you operate in a somewhat sensitive sector. And so it seems that sector, the big question today is, how do we balance between openness and commercial cooperation, especially when we have this rise of polarity, and between protecting critical technology supply chains for the national infrastructure network? So what is your take on that? I'd also like to know your opinion if you agree with the idea of rising polarity from your perspective. Do you see it in your sector, or is it a competition that is yet to come?
Thank you for the invitation here. And is my sound clear? Yeah. So with just a background about myself, I used to be a pilot for 14 years, then a regulator for 6 years, an investor for a year, and now transitioning to the private sector. So the reason I mentioned this gave me the lens of all views from, within this mobility sector. So when it comes to competition, there is a fierce competition that started with, between Europe, China and the US in terms of the, I'll be specific when it comes to the air taxis and the drones. Unfortunately, what happened in Europe is certain companies went bankrupt. The US is still trying, but the Chinese have, so from the last 2 years I've been saying to the ecosystem, the Chinese will dominate. And starting next year, you will see them in the skies of Abu Dhabi going commercial. Now I'll go like 8 years back. What happened, and I'll touch upon some of the points within what we're talking about. How the UAE can position itself in the sphere. Because it was a simple matter of enabling regulations. You know, the certifying bodies in the world, they're, you know, the FAA, the US, and Europe. But what the UAE did is, with this developing or emerging technologies, they said, we're willing to certify you and walk in parallel with you. We'll not wait for that end goal for you to be ready. So what happened is the following. The regulator started learning with a technology provider. And fast forward, the UAE become, because not, you know, some comments we get is that we're just throwing money. We did not throw money. We just enabled an idea. And that attracted all the companies for the UAE. It's not only for the, you know, what they call the advanced air mobility, the eVTOLs and drones, but also the autonomous cars, which there was an event 3 days ago called DriftX. It's still on LinkedIn and the socials. You can see the achievements we had there. The UAE became a test bed for all of them. Our market is small, but they are coming here to validate their systems. So this gives us the know-how. And already in the beginning of the year, when we noticed that the commercialization is coming soon, is how we can package the regulator, the operator, and go around countries where, whether it's the GCC or African countries, and this is the soft power, that you take that know-how, whether the product is still Chinese or American, but they have not packaged it in a way that, you know, this is how you do it, this is how we've done it, and it's safe, and you can, you know, take it on board and get going. Did I miss some parts of your question?
No, I guess let me build on what you said. It takes me to my next question. You mentioned the interplay between the regulators and the private sector. So what partnership models do you think drive success, especially in your sector? Is it purely the private sector, or does the public sector also have a role, or is it a public and private partnership? Or maybe does each model have its strengths at certain stages of the development process?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for each model, whether it's bilateral, multi-party, or PPP, the public-private partnership, it depends on where you apply it. And there is where it can be leveraged. I mean, if you go for infrastructure, long-term year horizon, you have a certain type of investor. This is where you go into PPP. You know, if you want to build your digital AI powerhouse, which the UAE is, you know, taking a leap in, and this, I'm going a bit back and forth. The other advanced technology, which I'm glad that the UAE leadership is taking, you know, a global stage in, is your data. 5-10 years from now, data is going to be an asset and is going to be moving the world, and more than just a soft power. It's going to be a power. Who owns your data? You know, we realize how elections have been played with data and using social media. But now, as a sovereign nation, that you want to own your data, that you want to operate your autonomous cars, you want to operate your autonomous air taxis, if you don't have that sovereign data, someone can flick a switch and put a disaster in your country. So yeah, each model has its own particularity. Where do you apply it?
Dr. Jens, let's give this conversation some academic flavor again. And so the big debate right now is between the SOE model in China that is driving economic progress there. And on the other hand, we see in the US, it's entirely the private sector that's driving economic innovation. So if you were in the position of recommending to third-party countries, would you recommend a mix or would you recommend one of the two models? And what do you see and how do you see the strengths of each model?
I think it's an excellent question. And I would downplay the difference between the SOE model and the private model, because I don't think that the US model is entirely private. and so it is always, I think, a kind of hybridity between state and private interest. And you don't want to have too much of one or the other, because ultimately there is a dynamism that comes from private enterprise that cannot be completely recreated under state leadership. So it's important to have a bit of both, and to find that optimal mix. I think it's context dependent. I think this country has an incredible track record of actually finding that balance, but I don't think it's one size fits all. I think it can be found in different contexts, but it's important to understand what is essentially to be done by government and what's essentially not a government task, and try to find that productive balance. So I think that kind of addresses it, but it's ultimately one aspect that needs to be considered here is that the type of critical technologies that we are dealing with have a tendency of becoming infrastructures. So they go from being critical technologies where there is some chaos and flux and development, and they haven't quite yet settled, into being commercialized, or should I say operationalized, in a way that automatically become monopolistic and infrastructural. And that changes slightly that calculus. So I think that the development of these strategies are leaning much more towards involvement of private sector until it comes to becoming more infrastructural, where I think it's going to be impossible to not have a long-term vision from the state's side. That doesn't mean that it necessarily have to be 100% under state control or anything like that, but it's not going to really operate under completely economic laws by that time. And so I think that keeping a keen eye on the balance, I think it's going to be the crucial thing.
And I'm curious, what's your opinion on industrial policy?
Sorry, about
industrial policy.
So it's really what enables these technologies to take off, right? So you can't take that out of the picture. So industrial policy spans investments and trade from a domestic regulation perspective, to be contrasted with external trade regulation and external investment regulations, which is more about gatekeeping. So in order to bring direction to this, industrial policy is essential, but it opens up a lot of design possibilities. To say that we have an industrial policy doesn't give you much insight into how to design it. But if you come back to the idea of organizing the economy integrated with strategic partnerships, the interesting part, I think, is when those strategic partnerships are cross-border and involves a mix of state and private enterprise, because that's when you potentially could create a hybrid geotechnology power that is transnational and is a substitute for being a China and a US. And I think it's definitely something that states will have to look into in order to remain autonomous in the tech space.
Thank you very much. Just to tie this back to the current geopolitical scene, Mr. Malek, Awny, today there is a discussion on how the technological innovation in the US over the past century, in the 20th century, was directly downstream of defense investments by the Pentagon. This tablet that I'm holding right now is downstream of that. So my question is, how can middle powers align their investments and their regulatory frameworks to achieve some sort of autonomy? Do you think that there is enough goodwill between these powers, there is enough trust between these powers? Is there potential for alignment, or does zero-sum thinking prevail in such a situation?
First of all, I think that we have to differentiate between complete autonomy and what kind of technologies we have to continue to be dependent on other powers. Because achieve autonomous, complete autonomous is not possible in my point of view from the middle powers. They don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the know-how, they don't have many other aspects of this innovation and R&D activities. So I think the countries have to concentrate in two sides. First thing is about what are the strategic technologies for their interest. And these strategic technologies has two aspects also. The one that is civil technologies and one that military technologies. I think military technologies you have to have a choice. You have to choose either this side or either this side. It will not be possible to continue, especially in the most sophisticated weapons, to work with both sides. We have seen this in Turkey, for example, when they get the S-400 defense systems, they cannot get the F-35 fighters from US. So you have to decide. But in the other side, you have something what we can call commercial technologies. Commercial technologies and less critical technologies is the wider or most available technologies in the world right now. And this can be a field of cooperation between the middle powers. You can cooperate to build not the high-tech chips, but the commercial chips. This can be a kind of cooperation and to build the know-how, to build the infrastructure. You cannot jump on the mountain, but you have to go from down. I think that in this kind of commercial technologies, the non-critical technologies, the middle powers can cooperate together, and then they can overcome the zero-sum game. I think we have a good possibility for this in these IMEC initiatives between India, Gulf states, and Europe. This initiative has a digital aspect, and it can begin to cooperate between these partners how to build an inclusive system to cooperate in these commercial technologies and to take them outside of the big powers rivalry. It's a very complicated, really very complicated choices how to deal with the two big powers right now between US and China. But I think that you cannot, you are forced to, in some area, to choose one of them to cooperate with them, but you cannot cut completely with the other side. So it's a very critical way to go. But I think, especially UAE, for example, is still doing this. Yani it has critical cooperation with US. At the same time, she has technological cooperation with China, not in critical technologies, but continue to keep this kind of cooperation. The question is that, can the UAE, can the Gulf states lead the build of this new bloc, non-alignment bloc, in the southern countries, in the middle power countries, to advance their own infrastructure, their own technologies, in the non-critical and non-strategic technologies, the commercial ones, then I think we can build on this. It needs work, it needs diplomatic effort, it needs economic supply chains, it needs many things to be built, but it has to begin. because if you will not begin now, the acceleration of the innovation is so fast that you'll not be able to access this domain later. I will do something for 1 year now, you can innovate 1 year. All what has been innovated in the human history. The R&D discoveries right now in 1 year are much more than what has been discovered in the whole humanity. So if you begin now, or you will be out of the history because things are not waiting for you. Last thing I want to say that there is 3 main domains that are very critical in shaping the future. The first one is the energy. Energy is a matter of innovation. It's not just what we have seen before. It will see a great progress in what kind of new energies are going to develop. Fusion energy, this renewable energy, other energy we don't know about, but things are going very fast in this side. Second thing is the outer space. Outer space is getting, we do not see here in public, it's not very clear in the media, but it's seen a great progress and building new camps now between US and China also, but it will give the humanity a new and infinite access to resources. Because now we are shifting from discovery the outer space to exploit the outer space. Then you have to be part of this. Energy, outer space, and artificial intelligence, and data. This is the most critical areas for the middle powers if they want to keep in the process of innovation and R&D activities.
So let me derive 2 questions from what you just said. The first to Mr. Omran. It's about can you give us a ground level view of the potential for regulatory alignments with other countries, the commercial perspective, the technical perspective. And Dr. Jens, I'd like to know your opinion of Mr. Malek's evaluation of the scene. And do you agree with the distinction that he told us about between civil and military technologies? Especially that I know that Finland is going through a very interesting process right now.
Thank you, Sagar. So, with regulations, when I was a regulator, we mostly follow, previously, until 2012, UAE and most of the world followed the American system. And then gradually came a shift to the EASA, European system. However, when we take these regulations, especially in emerging tech, we take the best of both worlds. And even recently, since July, there has been a visit, and next week there is going to be an acknowledgement or a bilateral acceptance of the Chinese certification, which when back in 2023, the Chinese unveiled their passenger aircraft, the whole world was looking, who's going to accept that? So UAE is now accepting that. And also we're taking their regulations. And because, in China, they keep their regulations in Chinese, so we ask them, please translate it and give it to us. And have your team come and sit in GCA. So we see the frameworks they have developed. Because they have been so advanced, but so quiet. And now they've surfaced, and, as UAE, you will take, who's advanced, who's developed, and we're not stuck with any particular block. So you take the core principles that apply safety, everyone will take it, but then what is the differentiation that you want to take that is going to accelerate you even faster than the Chinese? And then you can, as I said, apply it to the other countries and export it as a know-how. I want to touch, if you allow me, just quickly on, as my colleague Malek touched upon, R&D. Yes, R&D is weak compared to the other global powers, and if we want to catch up with them, one of the ideas I had, which is not new, from a sovereign investor, he told me, we don't have tax credits. I said, what's that? He said, if you have a tax credit, you're paying credit anyways, but if you pay it in art, in R&D, and startups, 9 out of 10 will fail, 1 will make it, and at least you'll make money. But what is that doing? That money is fueling this innovation, these startups, this R&D, because by nature, we're a young country, but we're always looking at return of investment. We're not willing to put some investment that might or might not fail, you know? And even if we will take a technology that is, you know, not yet ready to be commercialized, it has to be very high TRL. So that is something as a nation. I mean, Dubai, they've announced maybe a month ago that they want to be the startup hub of the world, you know? But that's going to require funding. So how is that funding going to come? Are there mechanisms between the multimillionaires and billionaires to incentivize them to put such things, you know, exist in the Western world? When we speak about measurable strategic partnerships, you know, there is the FDI, you know, there is the jobs created, there is all that. But when you look at what China did, to the best of my knowledge, with Tesla and Apple, they've opened the gates to them, come, settle, manufacture. But what did that create? Is the know-how. The Chinese started knowing. Now, who's superior in the electric cars? BYD. So we have to think about this map. You know, yes, we want to be industrial. We want to have, you know, be sovereign in our power. Whether a lot of the companies are coming with dual use and are dual use in this sphere, but how to create that end-to-end policy that in the next 20 years we will be a small China, you know, with the best of all worlds from each space. That's what I have.
It's very interesting. Thank you very much, Dr. Jens.
Yeah, no, I do think that I think your question related to whether we can have different approaches to civil and military technologies, and I think that I think it could. I agree very much with the idea that it is a fertile space for middle powers to develop a leading edge in civil technologies. The question is, though, most of those civil technologies are derivative or dependent on other technologies, and those technologies are dual, in my opinion, triple use. And so it will be a second order, it's sort of a second order technology and technological partnership. I think there is no shying around from, you know, we know where the apex is. This is where we have to be. In my opinion, I think there's benefits to also be involved in the applied technologies, and in fact that can actually be a way towards reaching competency and critical mass in the apex technologies. But I think that ultimately the world is reordering around those commanding heights. And either you're there or you're not there. And if you're not there, it will be some form of dependency relationship. So I think there's no reason to be that pessimistic at this point, when there still is time, I think, to do something about it. And I think that I would be surprised if there wouldn't ultimately be more than just two challengers. I'm not convinced that we're necessarily moving into bipolarity. But I do believe, and I think that comment was also made, that life is getting tough for those who don't want to be folded into one or other dependency relationship. And I think that's exactly top priority to try to avoid, because, you know, unless you take active action, you will be under pressure to become dependent. And that's, I think, goes against the most critical demands of a state to not be. And so if you can do something about it, which I'm optimistic that can be done here, I think it's to develop that type of technological autonomy in cooperation with other nation states. But mostly I think that we need to be very, very careful about how that can be designed, because there are so many different ways in which a partnership can be conceived. We can think of various types of loose coalitions, but we can also think about something like AUKUS as something much more structured, much more trying to create synergies by looking for asymmetries, synergies by looking for asymmetries. See what I mean? So asymmetric partners can make great synergies. But that asymmetry also means that there is a hierarchy within the partnership. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And if it's done well, most federations or clubs or groups of countries do have a hierarchy. And the ones that are successful are the ones that has a functioning, legitimate one. So I think that thinking around in those terms, I think, is critical in designing a strategic partnership strategy that could enable synthetically a small country like the UAE to build an alternative to DeepSeek and ChatGPT and all these kind of things. But it's absolutely doable, I think, with the will and long-term planning, but a lot of sort of out-of-the-box thinking as well, because it's not really been done before.
It's very encouraging to end on an optimistic note. In less than 30 seconds, final thoughts from each of our speakers. Mr. Malek.
If you need to build this kind of autonomous block, it needs to begin with the infrastructure, because without infrastructure, you cannot even make these common regulations. You cannot begin any cooperation, because infrastructure is the main assets how to use and enable using these technologies. And I think this is a big failure for the technology infrastructure in the middle powers countries, southern countries, so they will be depending on the main two powers. I think they have to begin to build the common infrastructure for technological innovation and use.
Dr. Jens.
Yeah, I think that we have to adapt to a non-hegemonic world mindset, which means that technological leadership is not optional. It is essential. And unless you lead, you will be struggling along different lines. You will struggle to survive. Ultimately, if you don't do your job properly at all, you will become dependent. But you will also struggle in thriving. And ultimately, if you do have that technological edge, you will not only be a rule taker, but a rule maker, and you will be able to drive and lead. And I think that this is the crunch time, this meaning in the next few years, which countries are going to fold into which of these categories. And it's going to be, unfortunately, merciless for some, but there is hope for others. That's how the world is.
So we're tempering the optimism with some realism.
I'm usually never ending on an optimistic note, so you got me there. But I think definitely realism is very close by, but I think that there are some bright spots.
Yes. Mr. Omran.
I'm a commercial guy, but I love history and especially war. But modern warfare, especially what happened recently in the Middle East and in Ukraine, is not dependent on tanks and soldiers. We saw the heavy use of drones and kamikaze drones and whatever you want to call them. And if you notice recently, there is an uprising of, when we were young, the movie Terminator. That Terminator is coming real. So what we see in the civil world, let alone what's happening in the defense world. So that is something we need to catch up on.
Thank you very much. As we wrap up today, I'd like to express my gratitude to our guest speakers for such a fruitful discussion. Thank you very much for those who attended. I believe the next session is starting right now downstairs. Thank you very much.